Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the presentation on food waste prevention using food well. I'm Liz Erickson. I'm a solid waste analyst with the City of Vancouver, and I'm here presenting with.
Meg Johnson. Hi, I am a waste reduction educator with Waste Connections of Washington, the local garbage and recycling company here in Vancouver. And one of my favorite parts of my job is to do these presentations with the City of Vancouver and Clark County Solid Waste to let you know about different things you can do with food. It's definitely a passion of both mine and Liz's. So I'm stoked that you get to hear our thoughts today on this topic.
Absolutely. And near the end of the presentation are a list of links. Most of this information is available at the Clark County Green Neighbors website. We'll make that available to you. And our contact information is also available at the end of this if you have additional questions or to follow up. So here we go. Here's what we'll be covering: how food waste happens, why this waste matters, and what we can do about it. So we know that food waste is a problem, but we also know that it is a solvable problem. The state of Washington has adopted some very robust legislation and laws and done research looking at the issue of food waste, both the scraps of unedible food that gets discarded, but also the edible food that could have been eaten by somebody also gets thrown away. They found that food coming out of our residence, out of our houses, is about 37% of all of the food waste that's created each year in Washington state. So that's over a third just from our houses. The rest of it comes from businesses and schools and farms, etc. Well, we're just focusing on ourselves in our homes and where we live. And of all of that food waste that's coming out of our homes, over about half of it is inedible, so couldn't have been eaten: eggshells, bones, peels. But about a third of it, over 40 or about 40%, is edible, food that could have been eaten. And then the 10% remaining is food waste that was recovered. So it was saved, it was donated, and didn't end up in the landfill. And we know that we love food and a lot of abundance of food, and we're also fearful of scarcity. That's a big cultural piece of ours. And what you'll see on this next slide illustrates a graphic of all the food that is disposed of by a family of four in 1 month on average. And again, half of that would have been inedible, but over a third of it, of the food coming out of our houses, could have been eaten. And the average American is wasting about a pound of food a day. And that just is a little bit. A pound of food is, a couple apples. So one day at a time doesn't seem like a lot. However, it adds up day after day, person after person. And not only is, this a problem, it's a solvable problem. And research has found that on average, again, the family of four is not only wasting this amount of food, it's costing them about $1,500 a year of wasted food. Meg, do you want to talk about why waste matters?
I sure do, because it really has a lot of impacts, right? So not only thinking about the impacts to yourself and to your own home by wasting $1,500 a year on food that you're not eating, it has a lot of environmental impacts. One way to reduce that impact is to make sure that you're utilizing all of the food that you have. So every piece of this sandwich, for example, that's on the screen here, there is an environmental cost to it. So you're using land, you're using water, fertilizers that go to grow all of the ingredients for what you're consuming, all of the labor involved in getting that food to you in that form. You have to make sure that you're thinking about all of those extra costs. We don't think about those because they don't usually translate to the price of items in our society. There's also, of course, the economic cost, talking of money, Many of these environmental impacts have an economic costs. So producing something that is wasted, uh, just like wasting that $1,500 a year at your home, also has a huge impact on the food system as a whole. There's also social costs to wasting food. So in Washington state alone, over 2 million people are food insecure. And if you don't know that term, definitely look it up. It means that you, at some point throughout your day or a week or a month, do not know where your next meal is coming from. It is up in the air. You don't know. No idea. And 2 million people in our state, that's a lot. That's a lot of folks who are experiencing this, and a lot of them are younger people, so people under 18. But there is something that we can do immediately to stop all of these costs from happening, is to just make sure you're using your food well. Use it correctly. Next slide. Yeah. So why consumer waste happens in the first place? It mainly happens because we don't value food the same way that we value other kinds of products. So you probably wouldn't go to a store, buy 3 pairs of shoes, and then throw one in the garbage before you get in your car to go home. That's essentially what we do with food, right? Because 33% of what we're bringing home, 37%, is not actually being eaten, even though we purchased it. So it seems that we value food differently. Mostly it comes from wanting to have the option to eat something rather than actually ending up eating it. So, doing those aspirational purchases where I know Liz, she likes to pretend that she likes kale. She'll buy it and then she won't actually use it because it's something that she wants to learn to love. And you can't do that by, I mean, you can do that, but you shouldn't do it because you don't like it. So don't buy something that you don't think you're actually going to utilize. We can also see this evidence of like that consumer psychology piece in the anatomy of our kitchen tools that we use. So for example, refrigerators have grown about 15% in size since the 1970s to accommodate more food because we want to have that abundance in our home. And it's also a problem because the bigger the fridge, the harder it is to actually use it properly. So having too much food in your fridge, like you can see in this picture on the far right side, you can't see any of the walls. And the way that fridges work is the air needs to circulate around the food to cool it properly. So you're actually intentionally wasting food if you overfill your fridge because the food won't keep for as long. And also, another interesting piece is the modern dinner plate has grown about 36% in the last 50 years. So we want to fill that space with more food, even though we really don't need to, right? Like that's almost exactly correlating with how much food gets wasted every year, right? That 36, 37%, right around there. So there are a lot of interesting studies out there about psychology of food. Definitely check those out. It is interesting to see what you subconsciously do around food in different spaces like that. So next up, we've got the food recovery hierarchy. So this is a piece that the EPA put together. It's a tool to help us plan for and manage surplus food. So this is food beyond what is actually being used to feed humans. So the 3 R's we associate with recycling are also relevant to food. So first, reduce waste or refuse. So source reduction, right? Just don't take it to begin with. Then reuse it for its intended purpose, right? So to feed people, and if not fit for human consumption, feed it to animals. And then last, all of the additional pieces down there are recycling it, either through composting or recycling the energy by anaerobic digestion or by burning it. really interesting way to think about food.
And we want to dig into some of the tools that you might already be doing and that you might want to try in the future. We want to acknowledge that there's a lot of different strategies that we're going to mention in this next section, and we are not by any means saying that all of us need to do all of the things. We're hoping that wherever you are in your interest with this, in your own personal lifestyle, on your journey to think about reducing food waste, that you'll maybe find and acknowledge some habits that you're already doing. And that's great. Keep them up. And then you might want to add one or two more, what we call habit stacking. If you've already got one good habit down that we're mentioning, add on another one, and just one at a time. And this poster, this image that you're looking at, is from 100 years ago. This was right around World War I, and it was important then, and it's important now. So, food, buy it with thought, cook it with care, serve just enough, save what will keep, eat what would spoil. Homegrown is best. Don't waste it. So, pretty simple and straightforward. And we'll dig into some practical strategies and habits that kind of reinforce these.
And Liz, I'd also like to bring up before we
Yeah.
get into the next section, want to make a little bit of space that a lot of these suggestions that we're making here are only for folks who have the privilege to shop the way that they want to,
Hmm.
and to exercise all of these skills because they have enough time.
Yes.
There are a lot of folks in our community who have to take 3 buses to get to the one shopping center that they can access with their food stamps or, with the funds that they have. If you can just get in your car and decide where to shop, that is a massive privilege that you have. So just want to acknowledge that before we start. Not all of these suggestions are going to work for folks who have a limited resource. So
Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you,
yeah,
Meg, for bringing that
of
up.
course.
It's important. And one thing Meg and I have talked about in the past too is while this is a very solvable problem, it's also a privileged problem to
Yeah,
have an excess, an abundance of food. And we believe, and research shows, and the state supports, that all of us can play a role in using our food well, however we've acquired that food, whatever food we are eating. So thank you for that reminder, Meg.
of
Appreciate
course.
it. And again, with the resources that you have, the time and your interests too, some people are very interested in food and others it's just a means to an end. Um, One of the best strategies that we can I think a lot of us can employ is smart shopping and planning to just buy what you need or acquire what you need. We like to say first to shop your own refrigerator, freezer, pantry. What food do you have that needs using? What's available? What do you already have? And consider crafting your week's meals around using those products that you already have. Save yourself time and money, or use the time and money that you've already spent. For some people, it's a paper and pencil list, like the one in the image. That's still me. And I like on this list, if you can't see the fine print, the plan is to make stuffed peppers. And what this person has done is written out what they already have. They have some of those ingredients. And then below that, they've written out what they need to add to it, as opposed to stuffed peppers. I need all of these 10 ingredients. Go to the store and purchase those, when in fact, you and your roommates already have those. And a big component of this is thinking about using food while it's still fresh. Um, Keeping those available and, as Meg mentioned earlier, visible in your refrigerator or your freezer. This is a lovely informative website, savethefood.com, and they have a campaign for Eat Me First, and they have stickers and little signs to put in your refrigerator, on your counter, to not only remind yourself, but those other people that might be sharing that space to use up this milk first. This yogurt needs to go. This is the spaghetti sauce that we're going through next, and make that easy to find. And very related to this are understanding the expiration or best by, made on dates. Um,
All
I'm
of the
sure
above.
I'm sure you've seen these. Um, and this is just a sampling of the variety of phrasing and wording that is used. Sometimes the dates are very easy to read. Sometimes it's hard to decipher what the combination of letters and numbers mean. What's important and what we want to share here is that the only date federally regulated to ensure safety is the date stamped on infant formula. All of the other dates that you will find in your pantry, freezer, fridge, around the grocery store have been created by the food manufacturer to give some idea to the store and kind of to the customer on when that particular product would be have the highest quality. A lot of it is to ensure um, that there's practices at stores that won't be selling either lower quality or potentially spoiling food. But health and safety are not the number one principle behind most of these dates that you see. So while we're not saying to do anything risky, we want everyone to be safe and comfortable. However, there's more and more research showing that the dates do not indicate the food needs to be thrown out after that date.
It's definitely best to use your senses,
Yes.
right? Uh, Spoiled food will definitely have a different look and different texture to it. It'll smell really bad. It'll smell distinctly like not what you want to eat. Humans have evolved in a way that make us want to not eat bad food because it makes us sick, right? So we know what bad food smells and looks like. Uh, and a great way to understand this concept is to just understand that spoilage element, right? Sometimes spoiled food is totally safe to eat. Sometimes it's not, of course. We'll we'll dive into that a little bit. But the general rule is if the moisture content on a food is high and it's moldy or it's gone weird visually or smell wise, it needs to be tossed. It should be composted. It also probably shouldn't feed animals at that point. If it can't feed this animal, it can't feed other animals, right? Soft cheeses, if they've gone moldy, should be tossed. But hard cheeses, for example, like a hard cheddar or Parmesan, just cut off a tiny section of what has gone off, all of that moldy bit, and then eat the rest. It's totally fine
If you feel comfortable.
if you feel comfortable.
But
Like
we're saying that
we're
research says it's safe to do.
yes,
The chart we're showing you is just a clip from the USDA's chart of when to eat and when to discard. And as what Meg is explaining is not informed by the date stamped on, for example, the carton of milk. If it's the day after the date and it hasn't even been opened, chances are really good that that product is still healthy and fine to use. Again, if your nose is giving you some red flags, don't do
right. The nose knows.
it. And we also encourage creative cooking. And again, this is more appealing to some and then to those that have the time and the interest or are very, interested in, oh, what can I do with my leftover rice and grilled vegetables? Ah, I could put them together for a fried rice or a tamale or whatever other kind of food I might be able to make with that. But there's more and more resources. We certainly could not list them all here, but we'll encourage you. I'll just sometimes take a quick Google search of I'm interested in I've got some coconut milk that's sitting in the back of my cupboard that I ought to use, and I've got a lot of grilled vegetables. And kind of put those two ingredients into the search bar and come up with some recipes or even ideas for recipes. And some of the creative cooking tips or even smart food prep tips that we like to share with you is looking at your cutting skills when you're cutting up vegetables or other food products. To a lot of us will take kind of like a big hunk of like the carrot top and toss that out as inedible, or a large chunk of onion with the big stem is and throw that out. And often we can get a lot more out of each of those pieces of food if we are careful enough with our knife skills and comfortable to get a little bit closer to the stem or to the edge. A lot of peels can be left on if they're washed. They're very nutritious. Um, a tip that I've been using a lot lately with lettuce, if it sits in my fridge too long, it starts to get kind of wilty and soggy. And before I learned this tip, I would just throw it out. But now I will set it in a bowl of cold water. And 10 minutes later, it is just as good as when I bought it and makes a terrific salad. And the same can be true for carrots, in cold cut carrots in cold water, or celery, fresh herbs if you have them. And all of these things just make that food that you took the time to buy and the money to buy, make that last a little bit longer. And we also give you permission or the idea to use different combinations of foods or substitutions. Last night I was cooking something that required a whole onion and I didn't have it, but I happened to have lots of little pearl onions from something from
That's
Thanksgiving,
perfect.
and I sliced those up and I used those instead. So it had a little bit of a different flavor, but in this recipe, it was a fine substitution and
Mhm.
using something I had on hand.
I mean, I never make normal pesto anymore.
Right?
I always make carrot top pesto with walnuts instead of pine nuts uh, and basil. I always have carrot tops, which is a great green, and then walnuts are honestly they're just cheaper,
Yep.
and they have the same kind of really nice uh, oiliness to them that pine nuts have, and I couldn't tell at this point. I couldn't tell the difference. They have a
I'm
very
excited to
similar
try that
taste.
myself.
It's really good.
And on this slide here, it mentions when in doubt, go to hero recipes. That's from a couple websites, and that's just what they call them, hero recipes, because you're being a hero by using up scraps or bits of food or making something last a little bit longer. And again, there's a link for that on the Green Neighbors website. Meg, do you want to talk about storage? You're good at
Absolutely.
this.
This is one of my favorite bits.
It's
It's
so
like
important.
if you can't store your food properly, everything else is a wash, right?
Right.
So the last strategy, and I think perhaps the easiest, is storing your fruits and vegetables and basically any other food to its maximum freshness, especially knowing which fruits and vegetables last longer inside or outside of the fridge. By storing fruits and veg for maximum freshness, they will taste better and last longer, helping you to eat them more because they won't go bad as quickly. I'll give you a few examples. So, avocados should definitely be kept on the counter until they're ripe, and then you move them into the fridge to prolong their life so they don't get too squishy. Asparagus, cilantro, parsley, any green leafy herb um, is best stored in water. Liz talked a little bit about this, or wrapped in a moist paper towel. Salad greens can also have a damp cloth or a paper towel over the top in an airtight container. Cheeses should be taken out of their plastic wrap immediately when you get home and then stored loosely in parchment paper or wax. One of the best things for cheese that I found is those beeswax wraps. Uh, Cheese will last 2 or 3 months in my fridge if wrapped in those instead of in their plastic. Uh, Grains, rice, nuts, and seeds should definitely be kept in an airtight container outside of the fridge. And then all of the other images on this screen, the one thing that I would make sure you take away from this is apples and bananas. This is like the little mystery of the rotting fruit, right? So both apples and bananas, if bought at a grocery store, they're ripened with ethylene gas, which is great because that means that they get to be harvested earlier and they have a longer shelf life. But it does mean that they emit that ethylene gas after they're brought home. So keeping your apples and your bananas away from other fruits and veg really helps to prolong the life of all of those other things. Even if you just keep it in a totally different bowl on the same counter as your other fruits and veg that are out, it really does make a huge difference for how quickly something goes bad. And then knowing the anatomy of your fridge too, knowing that the bottom shelf of your fridge is the coldest. So use that for meat, fish, and dairy, if at all possible. And then the upper shelves are warmer. So use those for leftovers, drinks. You can even do yogurt because that's a little bit easier to keep cold. And then snacks as well. Just knowing what works best for your fridge and not having to turn your fridge to absolutely frigid, right? Fridges should be about 40 degrees or right above. So anywhere between like 33 degrees and 40 is the ideal situation, Fahrenheit, of course, to keep your fridge at to have food last longer. Lots of fun tips for smart storage. It makes so much sense to make sure that you're storing your food properly. Oh, Liz, you're muted.
Haha, thank you. The Love Food Stop Waste website is also on the Green Neighbors website. And the Oregon DEQ, Department of Environmental
Mm,
Quality, has also done a lot of great research and particularly on food storage. So we encourage you to look there. And next to most refrigerators is the freezer, which is also a great place to store extra food. If you buy, get an extra loaf of bread. In my house, we don't go through bread very quickly, so we keep the whole loaf in the fridge and pull out one or two slices as we go. Otherwise, it would mold before we were able to enjoy it. So using your freezer, a couple images that you see here that we want to point out. The top image there on the right is overpacked, overstuffed. And not only there's two things that are going to contribute to food waste here. One, it's unlikely you'll be able to actually see what's in there to use it before it's been in there too long. And like the refrigerator, the freezer needs space. You want to be able to see the walls and space between the items in the freezer to let that air circulate for maximum effectiveness of your freezer. And then on the bottom left there, you might see some of that same food stored, but it's in what I'm seeing are single use servings. So instead of freezing the whole, half tray of lasagna that's left over for next week's dinner, which is a great tip, perhaps consider if you have the storage containers or baggies, slice it up, and then you may just have one or two slices at a time. So it's easier to see, easier to pull out and use. That's the second half of storing food in your freezer to make that food last longer, but then you need to follow up and take that food out and use it. Remember to always label and date your containers of food. Um, just save yourself that brain space and don't try to remember that you made lasagna on January 1st. Just write it down. And Meg that has a great tip that I've started to adopt where she makes what's inside her freezer visible by making notes of it on the outside and has that sticking on the freezer. So if she's just put in another batch of butternut squash soup
mhm.
along with her, leftover casserole, those items will be listed on the outside of her freezer so she knows that it's there. It keeps it more on the top of mind.
It's a great way to have my roommates not complain that there isn't food in the house because they can literally see, oh, I have 5 portions of a soup that I could get out and heat immediately. It's great.
It's fantastic. And oh, and one other storage tip, if you're freezing liquids like a soup, make sure to leave a half an inch or so on the very top because that food is going to expand when it freezes.
Yeah, don't let it blow out in the freezer. That is a bad situation
Yeah. And wasteful.
and very wasteful.
Um, a common question is around frostbite, or when you see the frost on either the top of, for example, the casserole, or if you've frozen a bag of berries. Um, the frost is fine. It is not unsafe to eat at all. In some cases, it might slightly alter the flavor, but at least from my personal experience, it's still incredibly edible and usually delicious again to have that food that you made with care some time ago, and then to pull it out. You can scrape off a little bit of frost. If there's too much, like you've frozen perhaps chicken breast or berries, you may choose to use those more in like a mixed sauce, or for the berries, maybe in like a simple jam or in a pie, as opposed to, on a plate. So you could maybe cook or mix them up a little bit more if you're put off by the frost.
Another good tip for that, to make sure things are freezing correctly the first time, which is something I have an issue with sometimes. I do a lot of you pick berries in the summer, and the best thing to do is to put all of your berries out individually on a cookie sheet or something like that and put that into the freezer. Then they're all frozen individually. And then you could put it into a Ziploc or a container, and you could take out individual berries if you need. It doesn't come out in a big chunk.
That's a
So
good tip. I didn't
taking
do
just
that
a
one year, and I was pretty sad.
taking just a little bit more time
Yeah.
to get those frozen enough to where they have their own life as
And,
opposed to in a big clump.
and then you will actually use them.
Right. Indeed.
A couple other types of food preservation that we want to mention. However, we aren't the experts to go into this. We'll recommend looking at WSU food preservation program. They've got a lot of classes and tools and tips on how to do these types of food preserving methods that are tried and true. Smoking food, salting it, um, canning, fermenting, dehydrating, or drying food, and of course, pickling. And some of these might be things that you're already doing. Maybe some are things you've been wanting to try. So definitely look at the WSU Master Food Preserver program.
They had a
And
great
of course,
jam recipe that I used last year. It was
oh,
wonderful.
nice. And of course, looking online, YouTube videos. I've checked out great books from my library too on this as well. And you can either pause this, or when we've wrapped up, we encourage you to take a quick minute in your own kitchen when you can to look at the fridge, freezer, or your cupboard and identify an item that you may be considering tossing out, or might be the date might be coming up, that Best Buy date, and just look at it, give it a moment's thought. How could you use that before it would get tossed out? How could it be preserved to use later? How could it have been prevented from even having that come close to something that needed to be used before tossed out? And some of these, again, are new habits, new ways of thinking about um, how we engage with food and how we use our food well. And on this next slide, you don't have to write all this down. These are available again on that first website, the Clark County Green Neighbors. They've got a great page on food too good to waste. And you'll find a lot of these resources available there. Now, Meg, we're going to end up with food scraps.
Of
Not
course.
everyone's going to eat the orange peels or the banana peels, or maybe inevitably you didn't get to an apple in time.
Yep. There are always things you can do with food that is not edible for humans, right? Or animals of any kind. The next step on that EPA food hierarchy is composting. It's really important to get that food that has gone, too bad to eat into someone else's hands, or into the City of Vancouver's organics program, for example, to be turned into compost, to actually go into making better food the next time around, right? So some food waste is inevitable, and that's totally okay. Just want to reiterate that. It is fine to have food waste as long as you tried to not make it not happen at the beginning. So yeah, if you live in city limits of Vancouver or the city limits of Ridgefield, you likely have access to composting services through Waste Connections. So try to make sure that the food waste is as small as possible by, not buying more than you needed to in the first place, and then eating what you want to buy, or vice versa too, buying what you want to eat. There are a lot of other options for composting as well. Two that I would like to mention are an app called Share Waste, and then a website called Make Soil. Both of these sites operate around the idea of individual community members having compost piles in their backyard, or having one of those carts that we mentioned for the organics program that you can put food waste in, matching you up with someone who has those to give them material to get made into compost. Check those out. Both of those are free. And then, if we go up the hierarchy to two pegs there, feeding people, if you have food that you know is good and will be good for a good amount of time, if you're going on holiday or something and don't want to leave a bunch of food in your fridge, consider donating the food either to Clark County Food Bank. They will take a lot of material, as well as the Vancouver Free Fridge Project. There are multiple locations around Clark County that are open to the public 24/7 to take food for whomever needs it, right? So it's much easier to get access to one of those spaces than to go through the food bank's enrollment program to be receiving material. So nice community aspect to that one.
What Meg has been describing is kind of another goal with what the state is setting out to do to reduce food waste. It's both reducing the amount of food that we're wasting, as we've been talking about and you've been thinking about for this time together, and it's also getting these food scraps out of the landfill as
Right.
much as we can. And so hopefully you'll find a way to not only reduce the amount of food scraps that you have, but maybe consider a different way of disposing of them. We know that not all options are available to everyone, and in that case, the garbage is preferable to an in-sink disposal. If you
For
have a
sure.
disposal, we don't encourage putting food scraps down there.
Takes a very long and expensive trip to go to the landfill anyway.
Yeah, hard on the
Uh,
pipes.
and just remember, food that goes into the landfill will not have a life outside of that landfill. So consider trying to find an alternative route for the scraps that you either don't use or that are inedible in the first place.
And that's the information we have for you today. And we turn it over to you to take a moment to think about what's something you may want to try. Maybe an idea came to you. Maybe you heard something today that you're willing to give a try. Maybe you'll take us up on that little activity earlier to find something in your kitchen that's about to go bad. Um, and we hope that you'll be in touch if you have any questions. And there's our email. And again, these are, um, we're available to answer any questions. Again, I'm Liz Erickson, and I've been here today with Meg Johnson. And we hope that you've learned something new. Thanks for taking your time.
Thank you so much.